On May 22, 2021, 172 ultramarathon runners set out on a grueling 100-kilometer race through the rugged mountains of Gansu province in China. The weather forecast was clear. The race was well organized. The runners were experienced athletes, many of them elite competitors. But within hours, a freak weather event would transform the race into a desperate fight for survival. By the time it was over, 21 runners would be dead killed by hypothermia in one of the deadliest disasters in ultramarathon history. This is the story of the Gansu Ultramarathon disaster. The Yellow River Stone Forest Mountain Marathon was an annual event held in the Yellow River Stone Forest, a scenic area in Baiyin City, Gansu province in northwestern China. The region is known for its dramatic landscape, towering stone pillars, deep valleys, and the winding Yellow River cutting through ancient rock formations. The race was designed to showcase this spectacular terrain. The 100-kilometer course would take runners through some of the most challenging and beautiful landscapes in China, climbing to elevations over 2,000 meters with significant altitude gains throughout. This wasn't a race for casual joggers. It was an ultramarathon, a grueling test of endurance that pushes even elite athletes to their absolute limits. Participants had to be experienced trail runners, capable of navigating difficult terrain, managing their energy over extreme distances, and handling unpredictable mountain conditions. The 2021 race attracted 172 participants, including some of China's top ultramarathon runners. Among them was Liang Jing, a celebrated athlete who had won numerous ultramarathon championships and was considered one of China's best mountain runners. There was Huang Guanjun, a hearing-impaired runner who had inspired thousands with his determination. There were firefighters, teachers, business people, all united by their love of running and their desire to test themselves against nature. The race began on the morning of May the 22nd, 2021. The weather seemed perfect clear skies, mild temperatures. The runners set off in waves, tackling the early flat sections before beginning the long climb into the mountains. By all accounts, the race started smoothly. Runners were in good spirits. The organization seemed solid. Support stations were set up along the route with water, food, and medical personnel. Everything appeared to be going according to plan, but weather in the mountains can change with terrifying speed. Around noon, as runners reached the higher elevations between the 20 and 31-kilometer marks, the weather began to deteriorate. Dark clouds rolled in with shocking speed. The temperature dropped rapidly, and then the wind came. It wasn't just wind. It was a violent, freezing gale, accompanied by hail and freezing rain. Temperatures plummeted from around 20 degrees Celsius, 68 degrees Fahrenheit, to near freezing in a matter of minutes. The wind chill made it feel even colder brutally, dangerously cold. The runners, dressed in lightweight racing gear designed for warm weather running, were suddenly exposed to conditions they were completely unprepared for. Most were wearing shorts and t-shirts. Some had light windbreakers. Almost none had the kind of cold weather gear necessary for these conditions. Making matters worse, this section of the course was a long, exposed ridge with no shelter. There were no buildings, no caves, nowhere to hide from the wind and rain. And the terrain was treacherous, steep drops on either side. Rocky paths, limited visibility. Hypothermia set in quickly. When your body loses heat faster than it can produce it, your core temperature drops. First, you start shivering violently as your body tries to generate warmth. And your mental function deteriorates, confusion sets in, decision-making becomes impaired. Your muscles stop working properly. Eventually, if your core temperature drops low enough, your organs begin to fail and you lose consciousness. In extreme conditions like those the runners faced, hypothermia can kill in hours or even minutes. Runners began to struggle almost immediately. Some tried to push forward, thinking they could reach the next checkpoint where there might be shelter or warm clothing. Others tried to turn back, but the wind was so strong and the visibility so poor that navigation became nearly impossible. Some runners tried to huddle together for warmth. Others sought whatever minimal shelter they could find behind rocks in small depressions in the ground. But the wind was relentless, and their wet clothing provided no insulation. Hypothermia was ravaging their bodies. Cell phone signals were weak or non-existent in this remote area, but some runners managed to send distress messages. Others activated emergency beacons. Word began to reach race organizers that something had gone terribly wrong on the mountain. But organizing a rescue in these conditions was nearly impossible. The weather that was killing the runners also grounded helicopters and made it difficult for rescue teams to reach the affected areas. Visibility was so poor that rescuers could barely see a few meters in front of them. Local shepherds and farmers in the area heard about the crisis and immediately set out to help. One shepherd, Ju Kemming, became a hero that day. He encountered several runners suffering from severe hypothermia. He brought them to his cave dwelling, lit a fire, gave them warm clothing, and likely saved their lives. In total, Ju rescued 6 runners, but for many others, help came too late or didn't come at all. As rescue teams finally began to reach runners, they found horrific scenes. Runners were lying on the ground, unconscious or barely conscious, their bodies shut down from hypothermia. Some were still moving, trying desperately to keep going even though their bodies were failing. Others were already dead, having succumbed to the cold. Liang Jing, the champion ultramarathon runner, was found dead on the mountain. Huang Guanjun, the inspirational hearing-impaired athlete, was also among the victims. In total, 21 runners died on the mountain that day. Most were between the ages of 30 and 50. All were experienced athletes, and all died from hypothermia. The response to the disaster was massive. Over 1,200 rescue personnel were deployed, including firefighters, police, military personnel, and medical teams. Helicopters searched from the air once the weather cleared enough to fly. Ground teams combed the mountain, looking for survivors and recovering bodies. By the next day, all runners had been accounted for. 21 were dead. Many others were hospitalized with severe hypothermia, frostbite, and related injuries. The survivors told stories of terror and helplessness of watching fellow runners collapse, of feeling their own bodies shutting down, of believing they were going to die on that mountain. The disaster sent shockwaves through China and the international running community. How could this have happened? How could an organized race with experienced runners and professional organizers end in such tragedy? The investigation that followed revealed a cascade of failures. First, there was the weather forecast. While weather in mountains is inherently unpredictable, the forecast for the race had not predicted such severe conditions. Either the forecasting was inadequate, or the weather event was so localized and sudden that it couldn't be predicted with available technology. Second, there was the race organization. Investigators found multiple safety failures, no requirement for runners to carry emergency weather gear, insufficient weather monitoring during the race, inadequate emergency response planning, poor communication systems in remote areas of the course, not enough checkpoints with shelter in exposed sections, no clear protocol for stopping the race if conditions deteriorated. Third, and there was the course itself. The exposed high-altitude section where most deaths occurred was inherently dangerous. In bad weather, it became a death trap. Critics argued that such an exposed section should never have been included in a race without mandatory safety equipment requirements. The Chinese government's response was swift and severe. Multiple local officials were punished or fired for their roles in the disaster. The race organizers faced legal and professional consequences. Regulations for mountain running events across China were tightened significantly. But for the families of the 21 victims, no amount of accountability could bring back their loved ones. Fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, husbands, wives all gone, killed by a combination of nature's fury and human failure. The Gansu disaster raised fundamental questions about the sport of ultramarathon running. Is the sport becoming too extreme? Are race organizers prioritizing spectacle over safety? Are runners pushing themselves beyond reasonable limits? Ultramarathon running has exploded in popularity over the past 2 decades. Races that would have been considered insane 50 years ago are now common. Runners regularly compete in 100-mile races, multi-day stage races across deserts, and mountain ultras with extreme elevation gains. The appeal is understandable. Ultramarathons offer a supreme test of human endurance, mental toughness, and the ability to overcome suffering. They take place in some of the most beautiful and remote places on Earth. For many runners, completing an ultramarathon is a life-defining achievement. But the Gansu disaster proved that the risks are real and can be deadly. In the aftermath, the ultramarathon community had serious conversations about safety standards. Should there be mandatory gear lists for all mountain races? Should races be required to have real-time weather monitoring and the authority to stop or reroute if conditions become dangerous? Should there be stricter qualification standards to ensure only properly experienced runners participate? Some races have implemented these changes. The Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc, UTMB, one of the world's most prestigious ultramarathons, has strict mandatory gear requirements, including warm layers, emergency blankets, and communication devices. Other major races have followed suit, but enforcement is inconsistent. Many smaller races still operate with minimal safety requirements, relying on runners to make their own decisions about gear and risk management. The counter-argument is that ultramarathon running is inherently about self-reliance and personal responsibility. Part of the challenge is making good decisions in difficult circumstances. Over-regulation could fundamentally change the nature of the sport, turning it from an adventure into a managed experience. It's a difficult balance. Freedom and adventure versus safety and regulation. Personal responsibility versus organizational duty of care. What's not in dispute is that the Gansu disaster was preventable. Better weather forecasting, mandatory emergency gear, more checkpoints with shelter, better communication systems, and a willingness to stop the race when conditions became dangerous. Any of these measures might have prevented deaths. The victims of Gansu were not reckless amateurs. They were experienced, capable athletes who trusted that the race organizers had planned for contingencies. That trust was misplaced. Liang Jing, the champion runner, had completed countless ultramarathons in extreme conditions. She knew how to suffer, how to push through pain, how to manage her body over extreme distances. But no amount of mental toughness can overcome hypothermia when you're inadequately equipped and trapped in freezing conditions. Huang Guanjun, the hearing-impaired runner, had overcome enormous obstacles in his life to become a competitive athlete. He inspired thousands of people with disabilities to pursue their athletic dreams. He died on that mountain alongside runners who could hear, proof that when nature turns deadly, it doesn't discriminate. The 21 victims ranged in age from their 20s to their 50s. They came from different backgrounds and different regions of China. Some were elite athletes. Others were amateurs pursuing a passion. What they had in common was a love of running, a desire to test themselves, and the tragic misfortune of being on an exposed mountainside when a freak storm hit. Today, the Yellow River Stone Forest Mountain Marathon no longer exists. It was permanently cancelled after the 2021 disaster. The Stone Forest remains a tourist destination, but the mountains where 21 runners died are quiet now. No more races, no more crowds of athletes testing themselves against the terrain. Memorials have been erected for the victims. Families gather to remember their loved ones. The running community in China and around the world pause to reflect on what was lost and what needs to change. The Gansu disaster is a reminder that nature is powerful and unpredictable. Mountains don't care about your experience level or your race strategy. Weather can change in minutes. And when conditions turn deadly, even the strongest, fittest, most experienced athletes can die. It's also a reminder that event organizers have a profound responsibility to the people who trust them. Runners sign up for a race believing that reasonable safety measures are in place, that contingencies have been planned for, that if something goes wrong, there will be help available. When that trust is violated, whether through negligence, cost-cutting, or simple failure to adequately assess risk, people die. The sport of ultramarathon running will continue. People will keep pushing themselves to extraordinary limits, running distances and climbing mountains that seem impossible. That human drive to test ourselves against nature and against our own limitations is powerful and in many ways admirable. But the 21 runners who died in Gansu paid the ultimate price for a race that should never have continued once conditions became dangerous. Their deaths were not noble sacrifices or acceptable risks. They were preventable tragedies that resulted from failures in planning, forecasting, and decision-making. We remember them not as statistics, but as individuals, athletes who loved running, people who had families and dreams and futures that were stolen by a combination of bad weather and bad decisions. The mountains of Gansu are silent now, but the lessons of that terrible day in May 2021 echo across the ultramarathon world. Nature is unforgiving. Safety cannot be optional, and no race, no matter how prestigious or exciting, is worth 21 human lives.